Hey guys, welcome to Irish Medieval History. And today I want to cover why are the Irish so backwards with the coming of the Normans into Ireland? As we all know, the Norman invasion of Ireland. And yeah, I highlight that, the Norman invasion of Ireland, because here we have the Anglo-Norman invasion of Ireland, and I think that's where the problem really starts, is people's interpretation of why the Irish are so backwards when the Normans come to invade. And it's a strange one because a lot of people have been asking me, especially this year alone, a lot of people have been coming along and asking me just blatantly, why is Ireland so backward? Why is it so tribal? Why is it run by clans, 150 clans, 150 kings? And that is simply down to propaganda. Because when people ask this question, I'm always like, Ireland isn't backwards. And I know people's interpretation is that Ireland is isolated, it's closed away, but I'm telling you now, that's propaganda. Before that, before this, the Norman invasion of Ireland, we had to deal with, the Irish, myself included, have to deal with Roman propaganda. And within Roman propaganda, the Romans are always, and it's not just Ireland by the way, it's everybody. The Romans are always trying to justify themselves going in and civilizing the people they're invading. And that way they can justify their invasion. And when the Normans come into Ireland, they're no different. They're trying to justify themselves going into Ireland, and they do so by making out that the Irish are uncivilized. Now, straight away, this is why I sort of disagree with the title that Wikipedia has, which is the Anglo-Norman invasion, because I do believe it was just the Norman invasion of Ireland. That's what it should be, because you have two types of Normans in Ireland, which is the Cambro Normans and the Anglo Normans. And I'll go into more detail about that in a second. But to start with, the Cambro Normans are the first ones to arrive in Ireland, and they come in 1169. The Anglo Normans, on the other hand, don't come into Ireland until 1171. And with that, the Cambro Normans had already been a part of a civil war against the Anglo-Normans and led by Henry II. Henry II was kind of one of the heads of the Anglo-Normans and many Normans that were living in France. In fact, the Normans that invade are a part of a larger empire at the time. Some people know it as the Emperor Plantagenet, and that's simply because at the time the Kingdom of England was ran by French people, and so a lot of people do look at it the wrong way around. They look at it the reverse way around, as in English kings owning French land, when in fact, if you pull it back a wee bit to 1066 with the coming of the Normans into England, you will know that they were French. Quickly highlight that their main language was Old French. Of course, you've got different breeds of French that were starting to appear and eventually become English and stuff, but their main language at the time was Old French. You're dealing with French nobles who owned territory in England and were kings of England, and that's why Henry II's main title at the time is King of England. But there's no doubt the man was emperor at the time, and he was emperor of the Emperor Plantagenet. That was his empire. And so Ireland wasn't dealing with a singular kingdom, which already, by the way, was already bigger than Ireland to begin with, but they also have to deal with all of this, okay? And that's vitally important as we move into this. And the Cambro Normans had already fought, who were settled on the southern side of Wales, had already fought a civil war against Henry II. They had lost that, and so when they invaded, by the way, they didn't have permission. They were mercenaries that hired by Diarmid MacMorrough. They didn't have permission to be in Ireland, and well, they assumed they did because Henry II had given Diarmid MacMorrough permission to hire anyone he wanted. I just need to explain why Diarmid MacMorrough was looking for mercenaries in the first place. And the reason for that is just before the Battle of Clontarf, Brian Boru had become Emperor of the Gael, and in doing so he had usurped the previous dynasty, which was the Nael, which was starting to fragment into different various groups. One group that would start to rise was MacLauchlins. Now, within the political aspect of Ireland, after the death of Brian Boru, Diarmid MacMail na Mór would take over, who was part of Diarmid MacMorrough's king group. Within that, Diarmid MacMail na Mór was loyal to the O'Brien clan, and the O'Brien clan was a vassal of Diarmid MacMail na Mór. However, after the death of Diarmid MacMail na Mór, Turlough O'Brien, a part of the O'Brien clan, would usurp Diarmid MacMail na Mór and take the kingship for himself. With that, Turlough O'Brien would then give the kingship to his own son, Murtogh O'Brien. He would then become King of Ireland and be recognised of the likes of the King of Scotland with a camel, and after a little bit of an invasion that I'll go into a bit later on, the King of Norway would also recognise Murtogh O'Brien as King of Ireland with a marriage alliance. However, eventually the O'Briens would end up getting usurped by the O'Connors. And the O'Connors then, because of the previous family I was talking about, which were the MacLauchlins still believed that they were the rightful kings of Ireland. And so they would go in rebellion against the O'Connors. With that, eventually the MacLauchlins would actually lose that civil war against the O'Connors. MacLauchlins were also allied and had one of their major nobles, who was Diarmid MacMurrough. And after the loss, Diarmid MacMurrough no longer felt safe in Ireland. So he went off to England, and there he got himself mercenaries. It's just Henry II didn't expect him to go off and hire the very people he had been in that civil war beforehand. So Henry II wasn't too happy about that. Regardless, when people refer to it as the Anglo-Norman invasion, I just feel it's too simplified. First things, the reason why I'm highlighting this to even start with, is that straight away Gerald of Wales writes a book to justify the Cambro-Normans invading Ireland, and by the end of it, it does actually work. He gets into favour of Henry II because he alters history. He makes the Irish out to be as uncivilized as possible, that they had intercourse with animals, that they had strange rites, that they didn't even understand Christianity. There was no Christianity in Ireland, when we all know that Christianity had been in Ireland since 410, and that we're now dealing with 1169. So our Christianity in Ireland had been there for a very long time, with the coming of St. Patrick into Ireland, as everyone knows. And therefore, we can quickly tell this is propaganda. And with this propaganda, we start getting this idea that the Irish are uncivilized. In fact, it even states that the Irish do run around naked for a good chunk of it, dressed in animal hair, if they're lucky. And when they're not doing that, they're breeding with animals. This is pure propaganda that we still see today. And that's why a lot of people ask me, why are the Irish so uncivilized? So not only do we have Roman propaganda, but we also have propaganda from Gerald of Wales, written at the time to show the Irish is very backwards. And as time goes on, people only add on to this. And so that's why people continuously even ask me today, why are the Irish so backwards? They're not. This is propaganda. Now then, with that, what are the Irish actually like? Well, to get into what the Irish actually were like and what kind of weaponry and armour that they have, we have to take a step back to the previous invasion. In fact, this isn't the first time Ireland is invaded. We know of multiple invasions before them, but the previous invasion before that is by Magnus Barelegs, who invades Ireland between 1097 and 1103. More or less more of a campaign, because there is a lot to it. He starts off trying to invade and take over Ireland. Eventually he builds up a marriage alliance with the King of Ireland, tries to quell the north of Ireland, and is killed during that. But what I must highlight through that is that Magnus Barefoot struggles trying to defeat the Irish the whole time, and most of the time he ends up losing. He ends up losing very bad, and ends up even losing his own life. He's killed in Ulster, and with that we can see that the Irish don't have any problems. At the time, literature that is written, as we can see in this book, Norse Gaelic Contacts in the Viking World, we can see literature written at the time that Ireland has what you would call knights, but they're more of the Scandinavian type rather than the French type. And that's very important, because when the French come in, the Normans come into Ireland, they look at it from a very point of view of, okay, this is strange because I've never seen this kind of weaponry before. Well, they did to a certain degree, of course, but the deployment of tactics and various weapons being used the way that they were was somewhat foreign to the Normans coming in. And so, for example, the usage of axes, very strange to the Normans, although you do see tactics here and there, not to the standard or level that the Normans are using at. So the Normans coming in do find it very strange in the tactics and the deployment that the Irish use in this period. And when I say Irish, I'm defining it as the Hiberno-Scandinavians and the Gaelic, who come in to try to defend themselves against the Normans. Also, if we look at the Vision of Tundal, it's the same thing again. It talks about these knights, but more of a usage of word of Reader, which is a play on words from the Scandinavian world. Very interesting that the same word pops up in Swedish. So we then know from the Swedish word of Reader, or however you pronounce it, that it's a play on words from there, going through the Scandinavian world until we get to Ireland. And with that, we have more of Scandinavian knights, if I can find the right one. Oh yeah, Scandinavian types. So this is more or less what they would have looked like. This is what the Normans would have come across when they came into Ireland. You know, not savages that were half naked here. We're dealing with people who were legit, okay? So obviously you would have had mail, good old helmet. Not everybody would have had mail. Some people are using it because they find it more comfortable just to have the shield in front and a helmet on top. Maybe they felt it was easier to move. Also, mail did cost a good bit. Regardless, people did have mail. It was kind of one of the questions I did get asked of why the Irish didn't have mail at this period. They did. Both the Hiberno-Scandinavians and the Irish. We know by the Táin that was written around that period that the Gaelic also had mail. So for some strange reason, people have gotten into the head that the Gaelic don't have mail this period. The period. Norman Knight. There's no massive difference there. Like, here we have the Norman Knight, and we can literally put it. This is the Norman Knight, and that's what he would have come across when he was in Ireland, you know. And furthermore, if we go into other battles, if we look at other battles such as Bangorn, we can clearly see that the Irish are able to hold their own. Now, the reason why the Normans still win this battle at the end of the day is because they use animals to flank and hit the side of it, which opens up a gap for the Normans to take advantage, and that has to be highlighted. This is the exact same thing with the Siege of Dublin, much more later on. There's a lack of information here, but I know from my own readings that what happens is that the Hiberno-Scandinavians and the Gaelic multiple times are able to hold their own in shield walls against the Normans. What eventually happens is that the Normans come to these situations and are exceptionally good at planning and strategizing and finding their way around situations. They're very good problem solvers. And you can see that again and again and again. You have people that are almost equally equipped to the Normans, but the Normans always come across situations where they're able to problem solve very, very well. Like if you run back to the actual empire itself, like this is an empire that pretty much didn't build itself. It was built by good Norman tactics. Okay, you have good marriage lines here, but regardless, the Normans were very, and this is the part that really gets me, the Normans were already very successful in Scotland, Wales, Sicily, the Iberian Peninsula, against one of the biggest Moorish kingdoms around. They were also very successful against the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, as is also known, in Constantinople, which is today Istanbul. They would also go over on crusade in the Middle East and many, many different areas, such as Germany, and they were successful, you know. So I find it very strange that all these people are not seen as backwards the way that the Irish are put down as. The Normans get very successful, not true because they win this, you know, perfect. They find they solve problems such as up against two shield walls. They use an animal herd to smash into the flank, and with that they're able to open in and kill everybody on that flank. Same with the Siege of Dublin. They're able to find a sneaky way to get around and then hit the Irish from both sides, both the Gaelic and the Hiberno-Scandinavians. And so the Normans are very good at problem solving. So I find it very strange that people don't look at it from the solutions or even look at the battle themselves. They're literally looking at this as oh, well, the Irish lost because the Irish were dumb, stupid, and, well, very backward. And so, with what I'm saying, hopefully you guys take that all on board, that the Irish weren't in fact very backwards. Obviously, guys, if you have any more questions, definitely ask. A few more questions I got in the comments section was one of which was, why did the Irish have leather armor? I'm not quite sure where this reference comes from or what you guys are talking about because it's not in Gerald of Wales. So whoever posted that up, go into further detail with me and explain where you got the leather idea from. Same person was also talking about bronze armor as well. We have bronze armor from the Bronze Age. I'm not sure where you're coming from with Bronze Age armor in the 12th century. Also, why didn't the Irish have longbows? That's debated. We don't have any longbow finds in Ireland, but the Hiberno-Scandinavians were no stranger to the longbow at that point. They had been very active in the north of Ireland and in Wales for quite some time, even after the Viking Age. Also, why was Ireland so behind? Full stop. The Irish weren't. To go into further explanation, if you look at the time, the Irish were allegedly, according to literature wise, already building Mountain Bailey castles. Granted, we don't have any archaeology to back that up, but what we do have, archaeology wise, is far more complicated than just Mountain Bailey castles. If you look at Cashel, for example, Cashel has architecture all the way from Germany, which is quite advanced for the period. Like, here you go, that's Cashel. Cashel is highly advanced for that period, so the Irish weren't behind whatsoever. And finally, that's it really. Why didn't the Gaelic have mail? If you read the Táin, the Gaelic weren't weren't foreign to mail, so I can't understand why they wouldn't have mail. There's no solid evidence to back that up that they 100% had mail, except for their literature had pointed that out. But we don't have any finds, but that's just down to the ground being acidic the way it is, that it just eats up both clothing and mail, swords, etc. We do have a few bog finds here and there, but other than that, it can be very difficult at times to find finds from that period. Other than that, guys, thanks very much for listening to my rant all the way through. Hopefully that answers a lot of questions. If you still have questions, definitely comment below, and if there's enough of it, probably make another video on this. Or if you've got any other questions, full stop, might as well make a video on those as well. That's what the channel is for. Anyway, if you like this content and you want to support the channel, definitely subscribe. Also, Clans and Dynasties are still selling merchandise like there's no tomorrow, and it's pretty much what keeps the channel going. So definitely get on over there and buy yourself a nice coffee mug. It's getting into that season of just chilling out, getting a few Irish coffees on the go and what have you. Anyway, that's it, lads, and all the best.